the trucks in the parking lot. They leave the trucks running so that they're trying not to damage the trucks. They're not trying to do long-term damage here. They're just trying to make a point that you can't run this company without us, without the workers. And so they make a point. They're effective. They walk out, and now the company doesn't know what to do because they haven't planned. They haven't thought this thing through. All of a sudden, they have a bunch of trucks in their parking lot running. And they're like, "What are we gonna do?"
And nobody knows how to run them.
Nobody knows how to run them. Nobody knows how to drive them. Nobody knows how to empty them. So finally, they end up figuring out, all right, well, we'll figure out how to get some folks here and at least empty out the concrete out of the truck. So there's no long-term damage to the truck, but we're going to lose a day's worth of concrete. This is sort of what strikes do, right? The purpose of a strike is to show economic power. But what this company has done then is that they retaliated. They retaliated by filing a lawsuit against the union and said, what you did cost us money and you need to pay us back. And this is what would be revolutionary in terms of collective bargaining, in terms of strike, in terms of the federal rights. The federal law, National Labor Relations Act, protects the right to strike. The company here and the Supreme Court is entertaining whether or not to upend that, whether or not to say that if there's economic damage, what the company's arguing is that the workers were malicious, that they intended to do damage, when in fact they went the other way. They went out of their way to the drivers probably care more about their trucks than the company does.
Right.
And so they went out of their way, but they're trying to attack the union to either get money back. They say they lost about $100,000 because they couldn't prepare for the eventuality that they might have to deliver the concrete on their own without their union workers. And what they're also trying to do is they're trying to attack unions and make them pay for this lawsuit. They're trying to drag them to court, nickel and dime, drain resources one way or another. They're trying to cripple the union. And that is what this case is really about. The case is whether or not federal law still controls, whether or not, there's a 1959 Supreme Court case that says that this is the way it should be, that the federal law has precedence over state law, that you cannot sue a union in state court
Right.
if the National Labor Relations Board says this was protected activity. They're trying to throw all of that out because, as you said, this is a decades-long attack on unions, on working people, that this court is going to continue to rule for corporations, and that's really what's at risk here today.
Now, again, you said this is 1959 case. This is decided law. This is you legal people talk about stare decisis. This is what John Roberts said he believed in, and he was just going to call balls and strikes. They weren't going to make up new law out of whole cloth, and yet this court has done a bunch of that, especially when it comes to labor law. And I point to the Janus decision that overturned the Abood case, which was decided law for decades. So for me, I look at this. I look at someone like Alito, who has a visceral hatred of organized labor and organized workers. And the fact that they took this case, which should never have happened from what my legal friends are telling me, tells me that this is probably going to go the wrong way.
I think that that's right. And I think that this is why more and more people, you sort of see poll after poll showing that the Supreme Court has the lowest level of trust it's had in the history of doing these polls, the lowest approval rating, lowest faith, people starting to understand that this court is making its decisions based on politics, not the law. So you talked about Janus, was a 40-year-old Supreme Court precedent. You talked about Cedars Nursery, the agricultural regulation in California. There's a 50-year-old agricultural regulation that just allowed union workers to be able to come onto the property for a few minutes and try to organize workers. That had also been upheld by the Supreme Court before. And here we are again. And this is just time and time again, they're chipping away at these long-established rights that workers have gained, that they have earned, and this court is trying to strip them away in an effort to really just bring more and more power toward the corporations and the wealthy.
You listen to the Rick Smith Show with Chris Kang. Chris is the co-founder and chief counsel of Demand Justice, their website, demandjustice.org. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at the work that they do. Now, what do you say to the person, though, Chris, who goes, look, the company did lose the cement. It's only right. It's only rational. The union shouldn't have done this. It was mean of them. They could have done this in a better way, given them more forewarning. What's wrong with having a law that says, or a ruling that says you can't do this?
Well, part of what we're seeing here is that the Supreme Court is trying to make these decisions on its own. It's trying to trying to take that decision away from where it should be, right? We have a law in place that says the National Labor Relations Board is the place that can decide that. They're the ones who have the expertise and the ability to determine whether or not it was fair or not. And they'll decide. They could decide, look, actually, what the Teamsters did here was inappropriate. Instead, what they found so far was that this very lawsuit was likely unlawful retaliation for the strike. And that is what we're trying to do. It used to be the case that the Supreme Court would defer to other agencies that have more power. We're seeing this in particular with respect to climate change. All of a sudden, the Supreme Court says, no, 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 the EPA can no longer make rules with respect to clean air and clean water. We are the great authority for environmental regulation. You're seeing this with respect to immigration. They're saying, no, no, DHS and the executive branch shouldn't make rules about immigration. We should be the ones to make those decisions. And so time and time again, the Supreme Court is just wresting all of this power, and they're taking this power on behalf of the wealthy and powerful, and the workers are the ones that are going to suffer.
No, absolutely. And it is the breaking down of our ability to regulate, our ability to oversee things, and creating a dictatorial court, if you will.
Absolutely. I mean, this is like we think about like the balance of powers and checks and balances that we learned about in elementary school. When one branch of government gets too powerful, the others are supposed to step in. But this Supreme Court keeps grabbing more and more power. Congress tries to pass a Voting Rights Act. The court says no. States and localities trying to pass common sense gun violence protection. The court says no. It's grabbing all of this power, and we need to wrestle with that. We need to understand that this court is not some independent, non-political body that maybe it should be, but it certainly hasn't been for a long time. We need to wrestle with that, and we really need to start calling out the court for what it is. And in this case, it's an anti-worker institution.
No, there's no question about that. I say all the time, Republicans hate working people. Just look at the Supreme Court. Now, let me ask you this, Chris, because I think we're probably on the same page that this is probably going to go the wrong way with the 6-3 majority that the court still has. What's this going to mean for the right of workers to collectively bargain, for them to strike for better wages, hours, conditions? What's this? Will this have a massive chilling effect, or will this just be the end of strikes? Because my fear is what happens is anytime anyone goes on strike, even if you're absolutely pure and do no damage whatsoever and you give them all the notice, there's still going to be a lawsuit to make you spend resources and spin your wheels in court to burn up resources because they can. And this will just destroy the power of workers to organize. That it's all bad here. But I'm curious your thoughts.
So, I mean, that's obviously the concern. I think that the hope, if there is one, is like you look at this moment right now, and even though all of the anti-worker rulings that the court has laid down, all of the challenges we have toward workers across the country, and yet 2022 had the most union elections in 17 years and the highest rate of successful elections in 2 decades. So, like, we're at this moment where unions are starting to find some resurgence. Strikes are up last year, right? They're starting to find more power. So maybe there's a way that unions can find a way, or maybe this decision. I think the other thing we're trying to see here is how bad is this ruling going to be? Now, it's possible this ruling, and I'm with you, like 5 or 6 of these Republican justices really don't care about the law. They don't care about precedents. They hate working people so much that they're going to go all the way. But maybe there's a way to sort of try to push on a narrower solution so that it doesn't have that broad impact. But one of the ways to do that is to continue to push and make sure that the Supreme Court understands that their credibility really is on the line. I think that we've seen this in particular after the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade this summer. Like, they're getting a little sensitive about the fact that the American people are catching on. They're catching on to the fact that the court is a political body, and maybe there will be places where they won't go all the way. This is going to be a huge case with a lot of big cases. Maybe this is one where they'll find where the Democratic appointed justices will be able to cabinet a little bit, and maybe the case won't be as bad as we fear.
Well, we'll see. I mean, because it just seems curious to me. seems curious the timing. You got the Federal Reserve raising interest rates to cause more unemployment because those workers are getting uppity, demanding better wages, hours, conditions. You got all these workers organizing, potentially striking. Now you see this Supreme Court case that is going to put a chilling effect on workers striking. It just seems like the moneyed interest, the powered elites doing everything they can possibly do to keep we the working folk in check.
I mean, it seems like that because that's the way it is. And I think part of the thing here, and I know you've cited this stat before, we think of the Supreme Court, Republican justices have had a majority on the Supreme Court for more than 50 years. This has been a pretty conservative court for a long time. And even so, with John Roberts at the helm, the Chamber of Commerce has done better than it's ever done before. The Constitutional Accountability Center does this great study. They found 70% of the time the Chamber of Commerce, when they weigh in on a case, wins. This is something that I think that we have so many of these. Again, we talked about, I've mentioned a lot of these big, voting rights, access to abortion, Obamacare, immigration, gun violence, all of these different issues. They sort of they take a lot of the oxygen. They take a lot of the focus in the news when it comes to the Supreme Court. And here in the background, we have the Supreme Court that is constantly, consistently, 70% of the time chipping away at unions and at working people to the benefit of corporations. And I think part of what we have to think about, and part of the thing we have to talk about more, that you do a great job of, is that this court really is an obstacle to working people and to unions. And we need to voice that the same way that we've seen a lot of people express their opposition to the court in light of the rulings last summer. And that is what I think will help draw attention and maybe change the conversation a little bit so that we can really start to build a little bit more political power when it comes to the court itself.
No, and that political power has to equate into putting people on the court who are not anti-worker. And you go through the former guy's 4 years of appointing enormous numbers of justices and judges to all levels of the courts, who all of them have a disdain for working people. And you see some of the rulings that have come out. It's for me one of those issues on when you go to the voting polls, judges are something you're voting for too.
Absolutely, and this is a place where I think that President Biden's work on the courts is not getting enough attention, right? He gets a lot of deserved attention for the fact that 2/3 of his judges are women and 2/3 are people of color. But one of the things that my organization has been working on, one of the things we called for even before we knew who the Democratic nominee was, we said the next Democratic president has to pick judges who have a different legal background. We have way too many prosecutors, way too many corporate lawyers on the bench. We need more lawyers who have represented individuals, and that's where President Biden has really taken a different approach. He has nominated a majority of his judges are, they're union side labor lawyers, they've represented individual clients, they're public defenders, they're civil rights lawyers. They're people who've sat across the table from a real life human being and understand their cases and concerns, not somebody who's just representing the government or a corporation. And this is starting to build a little bit of balance in the lower courts. We have to bring that to the Supreme Court as well. We really have to do something to repair the imbalance of 6 Republican justices who have an agenda, who have an axe to grind, versus 3 Democratic appointed justices, even though Democratic presidents have won the popular vote 7 of the last 8 elections.
Yeah, now I want to go back to this Supreme Court hearing today, because this is a very narrow case, right? This is just about the loss of the materials that this company lost. It's my view that down the road, this will expand to potential lost profits and who knows what down the road. Explain to what the consequence. Am I getting this right?
Yeah, so there are a lot of different ways that the court can look at this case and decide. It could decide that any economic impact is sort of like the thing that the cement company is trying to say is they're trying to equate this to vandalism. They're trying to equate this to intentional destruction of property, which, look, if you're on a strike, you can't burn the factory down, right?
No.
There's certainly
nor would you want to.
But there's a big difference between burning a factory down and spoiling a day's worth of cement, right? Where is the difference? And the court could decide what the difference is. It also could look at it from a procedural perspective. One of the things that the Biden administration has said is, look, if you want to do the thing that helps the company out, send the case back to state court and let the case proceed. but let the case proceed in a way that shows, that takes into consideration that the National Labor Relations Board has already made some findings. They've already used their expertise to determine that there likely was illegal retaliation. Use that expertise the way you're supposed to do the process. And that would be a half measure that sort of, it's a procedural thing that maybe the Biden administration is trying to give the court an off ramp if they'll take it, would have a very small impact. And maybe in this particular case, no impact at all because the union didn't do anything wrong, according to the NLRB. Or maybe it could be a thing that starts to open up the door to something much, much broader and makes it almost impossible for any union. It's not impossible to strike, but the calculation of what it's going to cost them, literally in legal fees, then has to enter the calculation, and it's a much different decision.
No, and that's exactly why the court took this case, in my view. I've been told by legal folks that I trust the court should have never gotten anywhere near this. It shouldn't have even gotten on the docket. It should have just been the state court ruled on it. There was nothing here. It should have been left there. But this court, this ideological Supreme Court, they chose this to make a point. They chose this to make new law. And this is what I'm being told. So the question for me is these are young justices. They're going to be around for a couple more decades. So we got a lot of bad decisions ahead of us. So there are people who are talking about expanding the court, of doing other things. What can be done with this activist court?
I mean, I think that, look, you start with the premise that this Supreme Court is broken and it needs to be reformed. And if you have that premise in mind, you start looking, there are a lot of good reform possibilities out there, and my organization, and I support a lot of them, but I think the number one thing that would actually help people today and make a difference and restore balance is expanding the court. Now, we think about the Supreme Court's only had 9 justices for as long as any of us have ever been alive, but that's not the way it's always been. 9 is not a magic number. It's not written in the Constitution. Congress has actually changed the size of the Supreme Court 7 times before. So we have an opportunity. There's legislation called the Judiciary Act, already introduced in the House, has almost 60 co-sponsors. In the Senate, it has 3. And even unions like SEIU support Supreme Court expansion as a way to try to restore balance and to force this court. These 6 Republican justices aren't going to do the right thing because they wake up one day and they realize that they actually should be following the rule of law. You're going to have to force them to, and you force them to by having a more balanced court, by adding 4 justices, and then cases like this won't even be heard, or if they're heard, they'll be heard fairly, and then the precedent from 1959 will be upheld, and that'll be the end of the story.
But what do you say to the people who say, well, that's cheating? You know, we won those elections fair and square. We got this conservative court that the country wanted.
Well, one, that's not actually true when you look at the fact that the, again, Democratic candidates have won the presidential popular vote 7 out of the last 8 elections. Then you start to look that President Obama won the election. He was actually the president in 2016. Republicans refused to seat his nominee, to even give him a hearing. And then you look, after 60 million Americans had already voted in 2020, Republicans rammed through Amy Coney Barrett, effectively stealing a seat from Joe Biden. If those 2 things hadn't happened, and if the president or the person who was about to win the presidency had actually been able to seat their justices, we would have a Democratic majority on the court. It would be a 5-4 court instead of 6-3 the other way. So you sort of look at the sweep of what the electoral politics say, that actually this should be a Democratic majority, and the fact that it's a Republican supermajority is completely out of whack, and the fact that these Republican justices are reaching out, they're grabbing this case, they're overturning Roe versus Wade, they're making it impossible to have gun violence prevention, all of these different things, they're taking their power and they've gone mad. And you have to do something to respond. And the only thing that these Republican justices are going to respond to, the only thing Mitch McConnell's going to respond to, is when we actually find the power and we have the power to effect change and reform the court, that we take it and we use it on behalf of the American people.
Is that ever going to happen?
It could. I think one of the things that I look at is I look at filibuster reform. Filibuster reform, in 2020 was, only a couple presidential candidates and maybe a couple senators thought it was going to be a good idea to change these arcane Senate rules and allow a majority of the Senate to pass legislation. Fast forward to 2021 and 48 Democratic senators and President Biden, who is quite the institutionalist, said, look, you know what? The filibuster is standing too much in the way of progress. We have to do something about it with respect to voting rights. We have to do something about it with respect to access to abortion. Like little by little, like this is like a big. This is central to our democracy, just like the way that filibuster reform has gotten a lot of attention because Republicans are using it to have a minority of senators obstruct the popular bipartisan support for proposals in our country. We have to use this and have Supreme Court reform to make sure that all of these measures, if we're able to pass them, really withstand the test of time. How many times are Republicans going to attack the Affordable Care Act and try to strike it down? We have a fair court. We don't have to worry about those things at the end of the day.
No, most certainly something that needs to be addressed. I just don't know that it's going to happen. I hope so. We need sanity. We need a court that is not ideological and this ideological. We need someone who, I go back to John Roberts. He said, I'm going to call balls and strikes. I believe in decided law. We need that guy. I don't know where he is. Sadly,
I don't know that guy ever actually existed. I think we have the character he was playing at the time. And look what it got him. It got him the Chief Justice. I think that we really do need to find a solution for the court. This court is driving so many of our problems in our democracy, so many of the problems with respect to working people that we need to find a solution. And look, I also will say this. Supreme Court expansion right now is supported by 72% of Democrats. It wasn't like that just 2 years ago. It's supported by, 50% of the American people. People are understanding that this court cannot stand and there needs to be reform, and they're coming on board.
Good stuff. Chris, I appreciate the time. Good stuff. I hope folks will check out the website, demandjustice.org. Chris Kang, co-founder and chief counsel there at Demand Justice. Thanks so much, buddy.
Thanks again.
All right, going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. Working people on the talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1860. That was a day of tragedy as the Pemberton Mill collapsed in Lawrence, Massachusetts. The collapse of the 5-story textile mill was one of the worst workplace disasters in U.S. history. Most of the 800 workers in the mill were women and Irish immigrants. Some were teenagers. During that fateful afternoon, as they were working, they heard a strange rattling noise. Then, within seconds, the mill collapsed. Tons of machinery crashed through the collapsing floors, crushing workers. Many more were trapped. Rescuers attempted to free the trapped workers. But that night, as the rescue efforts continued, a fire broke out in the ruined plant. Many trapped workers were burned alive. Helplessly, the rescuers could only look on with horror. The exact number of dead is unknown, but estimates range between 88 and 145 workers killed that day, with another 150 suffering serious injuries. The large building was only 7 years old when it collapsed. Poor construction was determined to be the cause of the disaster. In an effort to maximize profits, the mill had more heavy equipment inside than the building could support. The New York Times reported, the building was never considered to be as staunch as it ought to have been. It was built about 7 years since and was then thought a sham. Indeed, before the machinery was put in, the walls spread to such a degree that some 22 tons of iron plates were put in to save it from falling by its own weight. After the disaster, the mill was rebuilt. Workers at the new mill claimed to see the ghosts of those who had died in the tragedy. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
As many of its own members privately admit, Congress has become a pay-to-play lawmaking casino, closed to commoners but offering full-service access to corporate powers. But there's another government entity that's even more aloof from workaday people, and it has become a handmaiden to the corporate elites trying to increase their dominance over us, the Supreme Court. The 6-member right-wing majority on this secretive powerhouse now routinely vetoes efforts by workers, environmentalists, students, local officials, voters, and all others who try to rein in corporate greed and abuses. Appointed for lifetime terms, this autocratic tribune takes pride in being sealed off from democracy even bragging that they make rulings without being influenced by special interests. But wait, in makeup and ideology, today's court majority is a special interest, for it consists of corporate and right-wing lawyers who've obtained their wealth and position by loyally serving corporate power. And far from now being isolated from moneyed elites, the judges regularly socialize with them and attend their closed-door political meetings. There's even a special little club called the Supreme Court Historical Society that frequently reveals the cozy, symbiotic relationship that exists between today's judicial and corporate cliques. Such giants as Chevron, Goldman Sachs, AT&T, and Home Depot pay millions of dollars to this clubby society, gaining notice by and the appreciation of the Supremes. And yes, these special interest gifts are accepted even when the corporations have active cases before the court. This is Jim Hightower saying the judges insist that there's no conflict of interest because this access to them is open to all. Sure, all who can pay $25,000 and up to get inside.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So you may remember when we were on our Working Class Heroes radio tour, we stopped in both Burlington, Iowa and Racine, Wisconsin, and met up with the guys who were on strike at Case New Holland. And look, you know, the reality is these guys are fighting for that American dream that we all grew up believing in, that if you worked hard, you played by the rules, you were able to get ahead. And they're working for a company that, well, they're at every turn seeing ways to claw back what was once a good wage job with good benefits and good job security and make it, well, like a McJob, if you will. And these are workers who have said, nope, we're not going to let that happen. We're going to ensure that these jobs are good family-sustaining wage jobs, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. And here we are in this moment, months-long strike. And on Saturday, you had the members of Local 180 and 807 in Iowa and in Wisconsin vote down the last best and final offer by Case New Holland. And here to share some thoughts on that vote and maybe where things go from here, I've asked Rich Glowacki to come talk with us. Rich is the chairman of the bargaining committee there at Case New Holland in Racine, Wisconsin for local UAW Local 180. Rich, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick. Appreciate it.
So am I getting this right? Saturday, the vote shut down the last best and final offer, which I can't imagine was any better than the last best and final before this. Is this what I'm getting?
Well, it was slightly improved. We ended up getting Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh involved. He asked us to come to Washington, D.C. in December. We met with the company there. They slightly improved their last best and final offer from September. And then as a council, we decided that it was time for the membership to hear it and voice their opinion on it. And when they did, they voted it down.
Now, when we were in your local hall, and thank you for inviting us in while we were on our Working Class Heroes tour, that was one of the things that people were saying, you know, let us vote on what's coming up. And the members got to vote on it, and they voted it down. So, you know, this is one of those moments where clearly all along the company was not coming to the table and bargaining in what I would argue is good faith. So where do you go from here then? Where does this leave you? Where does it leave your members?
Well, obviously, the company still has a legal obligation to bargain. They can just go through the motions and make it, you know, look like they're bargaining. But we as a council have been meeting for the last 2 days, trying to figure out exactly what our next steps are. We were supposed to have a conference call later this evening, which I haven't got the information on yet. But we plan on moving forward and trying to get a deal that our members can approve.
Now, as I understand, you know, while we were there, this is a company that's bringing scabs across the line. In fact, there was tragedy, you know, not too long before I was there. You know, this is just a bad situation. And it's one of these things where you go, why would the company want to continue to push this kind of negative situation when your requests, your demands were not all that outrageous, I didn't think.
No, they weren't. And it's actually very perplexing. I mean, the company has probably spent 5 times the amount that they would have had to pay us with fair contract on the scabs, on trucking them back and forth to work, on putting them up in hotels, the extra security. They were paying police officers that were moonlighting $75 an hour. They were running 6 squads per shift for 12-hour shifts. They were averaging about $78,000 a week in just that expense. It is very perplexing that our company found it more cost effective to pay for all these entities that were going to try and dissuade us from holding the line and getting an agreement we feel we deserve.
See, this is the thing that gets me, Rich. And look, a strike is absolutely the last arrow in the quiver. Nobody wants to do it. None of your members, none of the people I talked to when we were on the ground at your local or in Burlington, Iowa, none of your members want to be on strike. There's a moment where you have to. But it goes to me, the amount of money we see in strike after strike and place after place that these companies pour out just to get a penny more, just to squeeze a little bit more out of their members or enact a little bit more control or power over their members is just, it's mind-blowing to me. I mean, there was that one case up in I think it was Buffalo, or no, it was Massachusetts, where the nurses went on strike and the hospital spent like $10 million on extra wages just to not pay the nurses an extra buck an hour. It was insane. But you see this time and time again, and it really makes no sense.
Oh, I wish I had an answer, because that would definitely give me the ability to make a better strategy. But unfortunately, everything the company's done has been unorthodox. It's been something that I did not foresee. I mean, I did expect them to be obviously difficult in negotiations, but not to this extent. The fact that they are not able to produce tractors at the same way they have in the past is being problematic. All I want our people to do is get a fair agreement. And I don't want to, kill the company either, because I realize that, we are attached, we're symbionts, we need each other. But at the end of the day, my members help make that product that makes that profit for them. And they're making exorbitant amounts of money year over year during the last agreement. And for them to come and give us this nickel and dime agreement and the healthcare piece all into itself, having moving goalposts where every benefit year they can change any part of the health plan, is absolutely unacceptable. I've never negotiated a contract where you had the possibility of, your office copays changing, your premiums changing, or your amount of coverage changing, spousal carve-outs. It's insane. And for them to think that we would accept something like that is just ludicrous. And that's one of the biggest sticking points. We, as a local, have decided that we were going to eliminate tiers. That was our goal in this agreement. We did not achieve that goal completely. And then at the same time, the company's trying to introduce tiers in healthcare, because they're telling us that anybody that hires in after ratification will never be able to get to the PPO plan we have, and that they will only be allowed to go into the 3 HSA and HRA accounts. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. I'm not creating tiers.
Yeah, I mean, and again, healthcare seems to be, again, another one of those things that, corporate America, they tell us, you love your corporate healthcare, and then they bludgeon you with it. Then they every scheme, every con, every way to get into your pocket possible. It's incredible to me. And this is one of those things where I keep coming back to. At some point, we've got to get away from employer-sponsored healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, that might have been the way to do it back in the day, but I think now there has to be a complete revamping of the system. I don't see it as being sustainable. Even under the plans that the company's proposing, they have one plan that is their HSA or HRA 3600 plan that has a $60 a year premium. So my guys would be paying $5 a month. Yeah, that sounds great. I'd love it. But they'd have to spend close to $8,400 out of pocket before they get to their co-insurance. And then they got to go to $13,200 before they're covered at 100%. I mean, one major accident with a vehicle, one heart attack or some other medical emergency, and you could be slapped with a $13,000 bill that you got to come up with. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, we don't make that kind of money. I wish we did.
Yeah, no, and if it happens in December, January, restarts again. If something bad happens in January, you could get hit with 26 grand over 2 months.
Yeah, exactly. You're perfect. Yeah, and then we sign up for whatever we ratify, say yesterday or Saturday, and in November when we have open enrollment, all of a sudden the 85-15 plan turns into a 70-30 plan. Oh, and by the way, your office copays go from 25 for the doctor and 50 for a specialist to 50 for the doctor and 100 for the specialist. Prescription drugs could be changed. Spousal carve out is another big thing. They could force our members that have spouses working at other employers that have insurance, force them to take that insurance and carry it on top of the insurance the employee is carrying by us. And the problem with that is our plan is an 85-15. If the spouse's plan is an 80-20 plan, their plan won't even cover anything because our plan is better.
Yeah. Now, what do you say, Rich, to the person out there listening who's going, yeah, but I have to deal with this. Workers across we've been getting beat up like this. We have to. You should have to too.
I'd say join a union. That's what I would say. If you want a better lifestyle, if you want better financial security for your family, if you want better benefits, the only way you're going to get there is by banding together as a workforce and joining a union and demanding that the company respect what your demands are. I don't see any other way in this day and age. The companies nowadays, they'll pick you off one at a time if you ain't band together. And I don't see how people in this day and age don't understand it. And to our interview we had in Racine when we were talking about what happened to this generation, they used to teach labor unions in school. They used to talk about the sit-down strikes and stuff that brought the industrial age into where it is now. They don't do that anymore. My kids don't learn nothing about unions. The only way they learn about it is what I tell them and what I have experienced in my life.
Well, in our grandparents' generation, the people who actually fought for this stuff passed those stories down. I know my grandfather told me, many a story of fighting to make the trucking industry a livable job. When he started, he was shoveling the coal off the back of a coal truck for 17 cents an hour, 12, 14, 16 hours a day. And by the time he retired with dignity in his own home, he was making a good living wage and turned that industry into an upper middle class wage job because they did exactly what you said. They joined and formed unions.
Yep, a family sustaining job that helped put kids through college, helped parents go buy a vacation home or buy an RV or whatever they wanted. I mean, put money into your home or for retirement. I mean, when we did our analysis before negotiations, we determined that over 51% of our members were not contributing to their 401k. Why not? They can't afford to. They need every cent of their check to make ends meet every week. So the company's proposal, which they said was very lucrative, and 300% match on the first 2%, 100% on the next 2%, and 60% on the last 2% may have been something that they consider. But if you don't participate, you don't get any of that. I don't see how that benefits them. And at the same time, they're not getting any pensions. So our generation, this younger generation, is going to find themselves having to work until they're 60, 70, 80 years old because they'll never be able to retire because they'll never have enough money to even have a retirement.
Now, again, this is another one of these side effects of neoliberal economics, of globalization, because Case New Holland, as I understand, another big multinational corporation, not local.
No, they're global. They make good money. And what's really ironic is that every one of their plants in Europe is unionized. They have unbelievable benefits. Mind you, most of Europe has socialized health care, so insurance really isn't an issue at the negotiating table. Over there, it's mostly getting time off. My brother-in-law's from Germany. They get an unbelievable amount of paid time off for having a child or just time off like vacation time. It's crazy. And we are like in the Stone Ages when it comes to that.
Now, I remember 25 years ago, I was on a diving trip in Mexico, and I met a kid who was from Germany, and he was on vacation. He was there for 3 weeks, and he said he just started the job 6 months ago, and he gets a month vacation to start the job. And I'm going...
It's a shock to the system to get a job,
Exactly. You listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Rich Glowacki. Rich is the chairman of the bargaining committee at Case New Holland in Racine, Wisconsin, for UAW Local 180. You want to check out their website, uawlocal180.com. The website, we'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at it. So in looking at this, Rich, where do we go from here? And again, I know we brought this up. How can people help? What kind of support are you getting? I know when I was there, the support from the community was still really very strong, but this has dragged on for a while. You guys have been out, 6, 8, 10 months?
We're on 8, just rolling up on 9. Yeah, I mean, the community support, labor community, outstanding. The community at large can't complain. They've been there for us. As I told you back in last time we had our interview, we even have salaried personnel from CNH coming and donating food and money, and they don't want to be recognized or don't want their pictures taken for fear of retaliation when they go back to work. Where we go from here. Obviously, our agenda is to get an agreement that we can get a tentative agreement to bring to our members to pass, right? How we get there is still something we're working out, but obviously it's going to involve bargaining, and it's going to involve the company pulling their LBFO off the table and continuing to bargain in good faith. I do not believe that they've truly tried to bargain in good faith. They've went through the motions. They've obviously made it appear as though they're bargaining, but at the end of the day, they're not listening to their members. They're definitely not listening to their dealers. They're not listening to their customers because they want product, but they're not getting it. And the product that the dealers are getting aren't built very well. So they're dealing with the problems that they have to before they can deliver it to the customer. I mean, overall, everybody in this is losing, and I don't get it. I mean, it's a lose-lose proposition right now. I mean, and as I've said to the company, this can be all fixed in one day. You just got to get off your pedestal and give us the kind of money. And it's not like we're asking for John Deere money, believe me. But we have had a terrible time since 2004. They took over $100 million out of our contract, and we've been struggling to get back to where we were in 2004. And even now, to this day, my assemblers have just now passed what I was making back in 1997. That's crazy. I made more money starting with that company back in 1997 than my new hires make now. And they make actually 30 cents more now, finally, under the last raise in the agreement. But for the last 17 years, we've been reeling, trying to get back to where we were. This company took us back almost 5 decades with that strike in 2004. Unfortunately, the labor market's in our favor in this area. We've got employers around here starting people out at $24.50 and higher. They're getting 2 weeks vacation walking in the door. Insurance is comparable. It might be a little more expensive, but it's still in the ballpark. There are plenty of greener pastures around here, and the company's losing very talented people because now that they've actually had to go into the job market to sustain their families so they can endure this strike, they're finding out, holy cow, there are employers out here that pay me better, treat me better, value me more. Why would I want to go back to Case? And I'm really concerned about what I'll be walking back in the door with if we ever do settle.
No, it's an excellent point. It's an excellent point because I know when I was there, the talk was the machinery rolling off the line and rolling out the gate, not complete. Things on different tractors that shouldn't be. All kinds of weird configurations that I'm sure somebody down the road is going to have to get stuck with, and ultimately it's got to hurt your business, and sadly going to hurt workers as well. But Rich, I wish you guys the best. Whatever we can do to help, let us know. I hope folks will continue to support you. Is there a way people can pitch in to help your strike fund, or you got to GoFundMe or any of that?
Absolutely. Anybody that wishes to donate to our cause, we're accepting donations the only way we can, which is via mail. You can send it to UAW Local 180 at 3323 Kearney Avenue, Racine, Wisconsin, 53403. Anything anybody wants to contribute to help would definitely be appreciated. We are running on reserves, but we are doing everything in our power to hold the line, and hopefully we can outlast the company and their craziness.
One day longer, brother. Wish you the best.
One day longer. You're right.
Thanks so much, Rich Glowacki, chairman of the bargaining committee there at Case New Holland in Racine, Wisconsin. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. What do you think? I mean, these companies literally would be willing to bite off their nose in spite of their face. They've got to be losing enormous amounts of money. But it doesn't matter. They want the power. They want the control. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1914. 2 men were killed during a grocery store robbery in Salt Lake City, Utah. Their murders were blamed on Joe Hill, a Swedish-American labor activist, songwriter, and member of the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, or the Wobblies. Hill had risen in the IWW organization and traveled widely across the United States. He organized workers under the IWW banner and made many speeches. He was most well known for his writing of political songs and satirical poems. He frequently appropriated melodies from religious songs of his time because they were pretty, but he changed the words so they made more sense. His songs included There Is Power in a Union and Rebel Girl became staples at labor meetings and rallies. In one of his songs, The Preacher and the Slave, he coined the phrase pie in the sky. After the grocery store robbery, Hill was convicted of murder and executed by firing squad. His final word to his executioners, fire. Later, evidence proved Hill was framed for the murders. Just before his execution, Hill wrote a letter to fellow IWW leader Big Bill Haywood. His words have been often repeated at labor meetings. He wrote, "Goodbye, Bill. I die like a true blue rebel. Don't waste any time in mourning. Organize." Hill became a martyr for the cause of working people. His body was cremated in Chicago, and envelopes of his ashes were sent to every state but Utah and all around the world to be ceremoniously scattered. 2015 marks the 100th anniversary of Joe Hill's execution, and the Illinois Labor History Society will partner with labor groups and artists to honor the legacy of Joe Hill.
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years
Labor History in
dead.
2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Now look, we're in this weird moment. Supreme Court has heard a case that would make going on strike potentially more costly for unions. The first step in the door, crack the door open just a little bit by saying, well, they wasted our product. They caused damage by actions. This is the argument that by coming to work and starting the day and filling the trucks up with cement, when talks break down and they go out on the picket line, that's costing them. This is opening the door. This is potentially overturning 60 years, 70 years of decided law. So that eventually they can get down the road with this Supreme Court to where if you go on strike, like those guys at Case New Holland who've been on strike for 9 months, and Case's profit margin has gone down, the products that they're sending out are crap, and they're losing money. They'll eventually down the road want to be able to sue those workers for withholding their labor and not realizing this is coming. This is why we as working people, all of us, need to be standing with people on picket lines like those folks in Racine and in Burlington, Iowa. That's the reality. We need to be standing together as working people in every workplace. Today I came across a Twitter account, one of these Starbucks workers groups, one of the Starbucks United working groups, the unions folks. In I think it's Glenview, Illinois, there's a store there that's unionized, that one of the women who's worked at that Starbucks for 15 years. Now, she was one of the organizers of the union, troublemaker, but worked there 15 years. The person who used to do all the cute little art on the chalkboard and was the person everyone went to because she was like the institution there. As people came and went, she was there to do the training. She was there to be the support network. She was there to basically run the place. But she was 7 minutes late. 7 minutes late. And, well, this is the second time you've been late in 6 months, so we're going to fire you. And normally, in this day and age, people go, none of my problem. Well, the workers there in Glenview, Illinois, the entire store at this one Starbucks organized and walked off the job because she was unjustly fired. It's that kind of solidarity. Now understand, if the Supreme Court does what I think they're going to do, Starbucks will be able to come back and say, well, the coffee went bad, so you're going to have to pay for all the coffee and the donuts and all the stuff and all the pastries and all that stuff because it went bad. And then eventually, like I said, down the road, we didn't make money off of that coffee and donuts. And you got to pay us for the profits we would have earned. Now, we're not going to pay you the wages, but you got to pay us our profits. This is what they want to do. They want to silence the voice of working people. Now, good on these workers for saying, you know what, we're going to stand with our coworker. We're going to stand with, as the one tweet said that, you know, she was basically the dad of the store. She was the one that everyone went to. She was the most into the job, the most creative, the one who fostered the new green beans, which I found quite interesting. She's the one who trained people. And yet because they can, they fired her. Now, because understand, they don't have a contract yet. Now, they'll be the union. They'll fight through this. It's going to cost money. It's got legal fees. And this is what companies do. I remember years ago when I was a union steward at the company that I worked for years ago. The supervisor told me, you have a grievance procedure. That's what it's there for. That's why we give letters for everything. And I used to deal with like 100 grievances a month of just dumb stuff. Of, you didn't pick up the piece of cardboard. I mean, nonsense. These supervisors just hammering people with discipline for no reason other than to show them that they could. And it was their belief that, well, you have this system, you have this grievance, you should use it. And it was this kind of butting heads that management wanted to keep us angry at each other, pitted against each other. And I never understood why, because it's not productive. It doesn't make for a better workplace. It doesn't make for a better outcome. It doesn't make for any of that other than a power game. And you quickly found out that corporate America is big on the power game. So this is one of those moments, and this is where I think we really, as a working class in this country, have to wake up to the reality. All of the stuff that they put in front of us to divide and conquer, we've got to overcome. We've got to leap those hurdles. We've got to put down the red hats and the blue hats, pick up the hard hats. We've got to stand together. Solidarity, my brothers and sisters. Because an injury to one, an injury to all, and good on these Starbucks workers in Illinois for standing by their coworker. The question is would you? That's what I want to know. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Miss any portion of the program? Grab the podcast. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Are you looking for a good union job? The Inland Empire's 14,000 members strong Teamsters Local 1932 has opened a training center to get working people trained and placed